Hi guys, welcome to the Lunge and Lift podcast. We are joined again today by our friend Franco Contiero, if I'm saying that correctly.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
No worries, good to have you back, mate. Today we're going to go a little bit deeper and get a little bit technical, but for a good cause. We're going to look through some of the criticism directed towards CrossFit as a training methodology, some of the different movements we do, like kipping pull-ups and kipping gymnastics, handstand push-ups, and just get a clinician's point of view, as well as obviously Rob and me as coaches, what we see and our thoughts on, the criticism that sometimes gets directed our way. Let's start. Let's go straight into it. I know this is a topic quite close to your heart, and it's also one that I've personally suffered some damage from, is handstand push-ups. Franco, do you want to give us a bit of context behind as a CrossFit enthusiast yourself, what are handstand push-ups, and let's talk through that.
If as a little bit of context, my experience over it was, I was actually I never trained inverted before starting CrossFit, before getting into functional fitness in that sense, and so I found it immediately quite exciting, and actually I did not in the extent you did, but I did suffer it a little bit myself in the beginning, and as perhaps it often happens, in particular because it was a few years ago, I kind of got into it before actually thinking behind it and being a bit self-critical on what I was doing, but I was just going through what the coaches was telling me to do, and yes, I did. I wasn't prepared for it, and I suffered a little bit from the movement itself, from the handstand push-up itself. Even if back then, and we'll get into that in a second, even if back then I was trying to do them strict, I was trying to be fairly controlled in the movement. So from that, I would say over the years, definitely working more and more with CrossFitters of different levels, I found a fairly high degree of I wouldn't really call it injuries per se, because I always think if you start thinking about damaging or injuries, it sounds a little bit definitive. Instead, most of these problems are problems that perhaps an athlete or an enthusiast goes through, but actually they do resolve. So rather than proper injuries, anyway, there are some dysfunctions, some issues related with the cervical in particular, and the handstand and inverted position, the handstand push-up.
Franco, quickly.
Yeah.
What happened to you? Because I obviously know what happened to Ash, but could you just touch on what happened to you?
Yeah, so very similar, probably, like just going through in that inverted position, and obviously because I didn't have the strength to hold myself on my hands for a long time, I would rely a lot on the support of my head, so at the bottom position, and spending a lot of time supporting my entire body through a headstand. Obviously,
I can sympathise with that.
Yeah, obviously was quite demanding, and that, to be honest with you, I think it was mainly muscular, and it kind of aggravated a little bit of a history of headaches that I also have. So it can actually bring up different type of issues, not only related with that particular cervical spine or a discal issues such as the one Ash had, but so it can be just a contributing, we call it, factor in there. But definitely it is a movement that when somebody goes into a CrossFit gym and looks around them, if they do see people doing handstand push-ups, they end up being a bit, okay, I'm a bit scared about these, or this is not something that I would be very comfortable doing, right? So it is a movement that is surrounded by a lot of criticism, if you want, from non-CrossFitters and some CrossFitters, I would say. And definitely, I would say, is a movement that needs to be taken both in terms of skills and also when you have it and you're doing it in high volume, it needs to be taken very seriously, and the warm up for it, the accessory movement for it, the person needs to be prepped properly for a movement like that, because it can be a little bit more critical than in comparison with others. Yeah.
With that point, so do you think it's handstand push-ups in general that are criticised, or is it the kipping variation? Because it's when I look at, say, bodybuilders, powerlifters, if they ever so often like to get themselves inverted just for a challenge, and I've seen this on Insta and stuff like that, and them doing handstand push-ups, they would, in regards of a CrossFitter, it would pretty much be half reps. So be going down, their head will not touch the floor and stuff like that. So but they're doing it strict. So is the criticism, would you say, the full range of motion where their head gets to the floor, so they're going from that stacked position, or is it the fact that it's going into a kipping variation? What would you say?
I think it really depends. It's really difficult to generalize for everybody, because if you take a novice CrossFitter, so if you take somebody that starts with CrossFit, obviously at the beginning, first of all, at the beginning, they perhaps wouldn't be told to kip, or they wouldn't know how to do it. So they would start from that strict position. And I think if you are not used to that inversion, if you're not used to even just support yourself on your hand, or you're not used to move your body from that inverted position to come out of it safely, etc., even that position and the attempt of a strict handstand push-up or a strict inverted gymnastic movement can be fairly, I wouldn't say dangerous, but can be fairly critical. Okay. Then when you go into more enthusiast into CrossFit, or even pro athletes, and hopefully the pro athlete has done a very good journey to get there. But when we get to those high skills, then I would say perhaps a strict type of movement, usually if the person is working through a submaximal set, etc., usually is a little bit safer, because people can control that range, while the kipping movement is a little bit faster, requires a very high level of dynamic control, and is a little bit more, let's say, it's a little bit more, again, critical in terms of fatigue as well. So if you're inside a workout where you have a very high volume and you start becoming tired for it, then you still need to go through the movement. And by definition, that kipping position relies on the dynamic component of your cervical spine, of your thoracic spine. And so if you're not able to control it, or if you're fatigued for it, that becomes a criticality for that pro athlete as well. So it really depends where you are in the spectrum of CrossFit, I would say. Trying to respect that spectrum is the most important thing, but nevertheless, even if you are an accomplished CrossFitter, you can still go through a particular tough, maybe you haven't slept well, you have a lot of other factors, you go through a competition, you are really stressed, and that keeping handstand push-up movement might be a very critical movement for you in that case.
Yeah. I think when we're in a class environment and we're coaching, and someone has never been upside down, or since they were a kid, say, and just getting them onto the box and making them doing it in like an inverted pike position, that is sometimes just a hold is sufficient. As you say, getting themselves up, like just being upside down is massive in general, because it's just never in day-to-day life, it's just not happening. So, but I personally found obviously with like strict handstand push-ups in general, I do get less tension headaches or anything like that. I do get less pain. But when I have been doing kipping, say, gymnastics for a while, I do find where my then efficiency improves, I put a lot less stress through my head. So, because this is when I know, like, when I train with like Gus and stuff like that, obviously he's very, very proficient at handstand push-ups. So then when I watch myself do it compared to him, he barely puts any stress through his head as it comes across. Always got all of his hair as a cushion. But as with his move, because he's so efficient, does that mean he's putting a lot less stress through his spine than, say, someone like myself who needs to become more efficient?
Yes, and I think that's common of every sport, right? Of every technical sport, and not only the inverted position. Like you're gonna have any type of technical sport in athletics, in literally every type of sporting occurrence where if you are very efficient to it and you took your skills from A to Z, really polishing every single step on the way, you're going to be more efficient, your body is going to be primed for it, your spine is going to be better responding to that stress. So I'm not saying that is an intrinsically bad exercise to do or bad technical movement. I'm just saying that is a particularly critical one in particular because we know that CrossFit has a huge spectrum of abilities, right? And CrossFitters, as you say, they even start from that pike position. And we also need to remember that a lot of times, in particular novice CrossFitter, when they come into the gym, they will lack of the confidence of movement. They will lack the confidence of movement of doing a side lunge. You can imagine about getting inverted. And often when you do lack that confidence of movement, you go through a little bit of an overactivation of your nervous system, of your motor system, and you just recruit everything that your body can recruit. And that's where perhaps your spine is fine, but your joint and your discs, etc., are fine, but perhaps you get into a muscle type of strain or a muscle type of injury of problem there. So again, it is a very wide spectrum of considerations to have there, but I would definitely say that if we want to group them, I would go for the first group, the novice CrossFitters that need to approach that inversion and approach that strict skill first, and then even when you have a high efficiency, and obviously somebody like us or your pro athlete, my pro athlete, they probably won't go through a criticality over that movement because they've done it so long. But if you have maybe somebody that is borderline there or is approaching that competition abilities, that is still going to be quite critical for that athlete.
Yeah, I think for me, as always, we've got to ask the question why. Like, why are we doing the movement in the first place? Like, it's a full body sort of vertical press. And trains, vertical pushing basically. And if we're doing that for general health and fitness, what's the intended outcome is to develop that capacity. So we've got to trade off what possible benefits we're going to get from the movement and how we do it against the potential risks. And one thing I just wanted to fill in the blank for the listeners was referring to my injury that I had from handstand push ups.
You're still alive, so.
Yeah, I'm still alive. It was basically all the classic mistakes from a beginner CrossFitter. I was doing my first open, and I had a minute left to do as many handstand push-ups as I could. I'd probably done handstand push-ups once in my life at this point, but
all right.
I had the strength to do them, but I was exhausted at the end of an open workout and didn't know the movement standards. So I did a couple from a headstand when the movement standards you have to start in a full handstand, and then obviously the time was running out. I was like, I just need to get as many reps as I can. So I eventually got up and then I was racing through them, trying to do them as quickly as possible, just dropping without control, landing on my head hard, and got a few reps out before the time cap.
Is this my only chance the rowing, wall balls, deadlift one? So
exactly.
I was exactly the same. I remember that workout. Trying to power through as many as you can. Wow.
Exactly. So disorientated, just like hanging and then getting inverted. And so I actually didn't feel any symptoms after that. It was actually in the next open workout that was the first time I realized that something wasn't quite right, which was all the thrusters and burpees, which was terrible just because I was unfit. Well, I'm unfit. And I was locking out my thrusters, and my right arm's always been my strong arm, but it was just slow to lock out. So my left elbow would lock out and my right was just a little bit delayed, and I have to really think about it to finish the rep on the right, which was strange. Didn't think too much of it. I just thought, I'm really unfit. I was really tired. Triceps are blowing out from the burpees. Then a few days later, after my rhabdo subsided, I went to the gym and started doing some dumbbell bench, and same thing happened. My left arm would lock out, but my right arm, it just felt like I couldn't really contract my pecs, or there's no mind muscle connection or any sort of drive coming through that right arm, which again was very weird, especially on warm-up sets. So I went to see a doctor, got an MRI, and I had a disc prolapse. So one of the discs in my, I think C5, C6 in my neck had basically slipped and was pressing on the nerve cord. So there was actually a disruption to the signal between my brain and my arm. I was getting pins and needles through my thumb as well. And it basically made me stop and think, why was I doing this? Like, what was the purpose? And obviously in the open, it's a competitive setting where you're trying to get as many reps as possible and go as quickly as you can. But in terms of handstand push-ups as an exercise, why they're programmed in the first place, I'm actually almost bypassing the intended stimulus by trying to make it as easy and as quick as possible to score in a workout, versus doing it in a class as, say, the skill piece, where we have a very clear objective of do it well, do it strict first. And I don't think I'd ever done strict handstand push-ups at that point, even though I probably could have done, but I hadn't practiced it, hadn't practiced lowering onto my head with control. So now whenever I coach handstand push-ups, I'm always like, if you can't lower your head to the floor with control, you're not doing it. There's no benefit in you risking that neck damage. There's 100 different ways you can train the vertical press without risking your neck. And so that's sort of my history with handstand push-ups, I guess. And one of the things I wanted to get out of you today, Franco, was your thoughts on conditioning the neck for the handstand push-up, because I think you've got some really great ideas there which should be integrated into CrossFit training for beginners as well as advanced athletes, because it does just condition people to withstand mistakes like mine if they do go there. So please tell us your thoughts on that.
So I wrote it down so that I don't forget. But before I talk to that, just let me echo you on the benefit and risk. So I think you're absolutely right. Like you need to kind of weigh a little bit risk and benefit as with everything in training, right? So what you want to get out of training, and what's your previous fitness level, what is your age, we should integrate also with what are your risk factors, for example, to have some pre-existing strain or a little bit perhaps of wear and tear, or things that might make the structure of your upper spine not as efficient as a 21-year-old athlete. So if we should really consider all of that. Now, obviously, not all coaches can be medically trained and being able to screen people for risk factors, but perhaps we could have questionnaires that are able to integrate that a little bit better into, for example, somebody signing up for a CrossFit class. It's definitely something that it would be so easy to actually implement. It's just somebody needs to take the time and do it. So those are the risks that we need to consider. From a benefit perspective, I actually think that there is a huge benefit on learning something new, on getting your body in a position or in a type of movement pattern that you have not experienced or you have not worked through for years, as you said, as Rob said earlier, with a lot of novice CrossFitters or novice people that want to train CrossFit. Because it stimulates the nervous system. There are a huge range of biological benefit from doing things like that. And I think an inverted position is one of those movements that, if you're healthy enough to overcome the risk with the benefit, go for it. Is a great movement to learn. But as you say, it needs to be done step by step, and it needs to be done gradually. And I do think this should be, obviously it is, I'm always a big fan of saying that it is the responsibility of the athlete, it is the responsibility of the member. You go into the gym, you should be educated in what CrossFit means for your body, and that you should be able to make your own choices in terms of what to do, etc. Because a coach has 25 people to look after, and they probably can't, they would be superheroes if they were able to have like a folder in their head for everybody and being able to control them throughout the entire session. Having said that, the actual CrossFit coaching community could take things a little bit more into account in terms of these high technical, critical skills, such as handstand push-ups. One of these things that can be done, and I'm just continuing on that, is, as you say, I'm also a big fan for accessory training of any type. When there is a high skill movement, there are hundreds of accessory movements behind it that you can do to improve your performance and decrease your risk of injuries. In handstand push-ups and in inversion in general, I think generally the CrossFit coaching and training style and programming way overlooks our ability to train and condition the cervical spine, our ability to train and condition the inverted position cervical spine, but even just the cervical spine stability which can be conditioned in a huge range of movement, in a huge range of accessory environments and context. So I think, yes, we should really look into that, because we are used to, if you think about it, you probably are all, and the listeners, if they do CrossFit, they're all familiar with the situation. I go into the class, there is handstand push-ups either as skills or as a metcon, and as a warm-up or as accessory in the programming for that skill, there is overhead position of your upper back and shoulder complex. There might be thoracic spine mobility and perhaps, if we're lucky, stability. There might be some core because we want to have a good hollow position. But then there is never a priming exercise for the neck muscles. There is never a stability exercise for the neck muscles. Even me, and we can get fancy, but even just a headstand with perhaps some feet reaches in different direction, just to create a little bit of that dynamic challenge to the cervical spine, obviously of the people that can do it, right? And I'm talking about a high-performing athlete or a high-performing member in this case. But something like that, which is able to prime a little bit the cervical spine, to create a little bit of those reaction before I actually go and do those movements repetitively under tension, under fatigue, it is definitely something that should be incorporated or implemented in every CrossFit program. In my opinion, both as an accessory in your macro and micro programs, and as a priming movement or a warm-up movement for that single session, definitely.
Definitely, yeah. I think it's almost like if you're going to go out for a run, warming up your ankles. Like, of course, you're going to do that. Of course, you're going to do a little bit of jumping or lunging at the very least to wake up that proprioception and sort of dynamic stabilization.
With the difference that you also walk all day, instead you don't have any pressure on your head. So even more would be critical, and it makes more sense, the fact that you needed to actually warm that up because you don't wake up, get out of bed and be like, you know what, I'm just going to get to the kitchen on my head, So you do need to actually do it in the session.
I think as from a coach's perspective, and I'm guilty of this, and it's just we definitely say we're more conscious of priming the upside down position in general rather than the neck. So just the neck is like the forgotten thing to be, which I know is pretty much exactly what you said, but we prime everything else, including say even like all the way to say the kip, but then we haven't thought about the actual downward pressure of the neck when you get into that compression state. So that's, I know it from my own training as well. It's not something that
in some ways I know we want to perhaps stay a little bit on the inversion and the handstand push-ups, but you could take that into the entire spine, right? And that is not only I would say coach issues, in my opinion. Like if you think from a training perspective and coaching perspective, yes, you do have sometimes some accessory like Jefferson curls and some other accessory for the lower back, etc. But most of the time you train the lower back in an isometric state because you try to hold it in a position when you're deadlifting to keep your back nice and straight, to keep space on your back. These are the type of clues you give to your client probably, and the type of things you read online in programming, etc. So you keep that isometric position rather than accessory, that spinal strength for movement, for reaction. And then if you think about it, the thoracic spine, for example, is a big one in my opinion that is completely neglected as well, in the sense that we do a lot of mobility for the upper back. We do a lot of stretching, foam rolling, med ball, pushing back, etc. But then you don't actually strengthen it, or you just think, okay, I got the mobility and now it's going to get stronger because I do everything else, and it's going to be part of it, which is a fair point perhaps if everything goes right and you're 25 and nice and healthy and you're lucky. But there will be a subgroup of population that will be a part of the CrossFitting community that would really benefit from a little bit of an accessory program for strengthening the thoracic spine and the cervical spine.
I do think that is I know which you kind of touched on there, but it's like in a class environment, I think that's definitely one of the hardest things to prime and prep and accessorize everything in that way for, say, the handstand push-up, even though everything should obviously be periodized to progression to get someone to their handstand push-up, where we obviously have, say, a class of, say 20 to 25 people with different abilities. It's in that coach's responsibility to go around and say, address the people that are, say, quite proficient, and say, cool, maybe start adding in this into your own training or something, because during an open gym you can do that, or even you can slide across in the corner of the gym, just do some accessory bits that are going to, say, promote that, say promote health for the, say, the upper back and so forth. And in general, I'm just thinking about what you were saying there about actually the not having doing dynamic movements through the spine. And that's, I think a lot of that comes from people just being scared of, especially like as a coach, I'm confident enough with things like a Jefferson's curl and stuff like that, where people are like, oh, that just looks like a really bad. They don't understand the stimulus of what the target is, and understanding that going beyond an isometric hold, and actually the importance of taking and moving all the vertebrae through their range of motion, so that when you do go out of position, say in a deadlift or something like that, that you know how to, say, re-stabilize in a slightly compromised position, because that's so important. And I just and for me, it's I think it is the industry as a whole. I think that everything needs to be picture perfect in people's eyes, and understanding that we're all not going to look the same, and we are going to look different when we deadlift. We are going to look different when we do handstand push-ups. But as long as we're going towards the same end goal, and we're at the right level, if you know what I mean. As you say, are you ready to kick? Are you ready to do it strict? Are you ready to be upside down? So I think it's you're very right, and it's really nice to hear when you say it's a thing of, it is the coach's responsibility, but it's also the athlete's responsibility as well to understand and to not, because it comes down to like ego lifting, doesn't it? Even though you're lifting your own body, and it's, I need to get myself upside down because everyone else in the class is. And what's touching on this? So I'm just thinking about the class now. It's really nice. I'm thinking back. There are so many members which are very content with staying on the box and doing their pipe regressions, because they know that's their level, and it's really refreshing when you think that people are very conscious of that, and they, of course they would like to probably go upside down against the wall, but they know that they're not ready. And I think as a coach, it's making sure you're then still giving that member that, say, doing their pipe regressions or something like that, more benefit, so they can see that if they want to go inverted, that there is an opportunity. They won't always be stuck in the box. It's just quite refreshing to hear from yourself, like the views, say, a member, but also the clinician side of things. So.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. That for me, that the biggest red flag in a handstand push-up class is the person who insists on doing kipping handstand push-ups when they don't have a great deal of strict strength. Because if they're efficient with the kip, they can get themselves up into the handstand using great hip drive and a big kick, but they actually don't have the strict shoulder strength to lower themselves down with control onto their head. So especially in a workout, they're able to get themselves up to the position where they have all the potential energy to drop on their head really aggressively, but they don't have the control to get down. And it doesn't really hurt. I think that's the other thing that needs to be noted, is that dropping on your head doesn't really hurt. There's a little bit of a jolt, a little bit of a shock, but actually they don't really feel any pain, especially if they've got the adrenaline of a workout, which is exactly what happened to me. So you drop down and then you can kick back up, and you can essentially do loads and loads of reps that you can't actually control. And it's kind of, you're hurting yourself by being efficient. Like if you weren't allowed to kip, you wouldn't be able to get into the handstand position from which you can damage yourself. But because you're allowed to kip,
which goes on the thing of like Greg Glassman, and he's like, he taught, and obviously the guy that created CrossFit, and he's like, it's all of his stuff started out as strict, and it was just when it started, which this can lead us into the next part which we want to discuss. But if Greg Glassman said, right, we want to make sure we're doing our strict pull-ups, our strict handstand push-ups, and so forth, but then when you start saying we need to do something for time, obviously he didn't come up with the kip. The body did. The body naturally said, right, I need to get, say, to the forearm back up as quickly as possible, or I need to get to my chin over the bar as quickly as possible. So the kip that we know today wasn't even, say, taught. It was, I need to move as fast as possible because there's, say, money on the line, or because obviously it's competition, isn't it? So, and then once we start seeing things like the competition, it starts to emulate over into the gym environment, because that's what people see. But they don't see nowadays, obviously, where we've been so many years past where kipping first got started, and they haven't now seen all the, say, the strict work, as you just mentioned, that also these pro athletes do continuous, and they condition themselves. And I reckon all the upper back strength endurance and stuff like that you probably suggest, they probably do, especially the ones at the highest of levels, because that's the thing, when they're looking to unlock that extra little bit, that's the extra little bits that make the difference. Not that, oh, I can move faster. It's cool, okay, can you move faster, but stay fit during it and not get injured? So when it comes to that side of things, kipping in general, what do you feel that kipping is something that we should look to go towards, or like when is it? When would you recommend it start to be integrated?
Well, it's quite nice you put it in terms of almost like a natural evolution of the movement and the CrossFit, and I think you're on it with that, because if you think about, I mean, to be honest with you, what kipping is just the functional version of that strict movement. So if you're thinking about a pull-up, for example, and you're thinking about you're doing a pull-up for for bodybuilding and to get bigger on your body, then you're going to do a strict pull-up, and you don't want a full range. You want to keep the fascial tissue tight because you want to create that sarcolemmatic pump. And fair enough, is the sport of bodybuilding, right? But if you are running away from a dog or whatever, and you need to jump and muscle up on top of a gate or whatever, and you need to do a pull up on that gate, you're going to use as much as you can of your body to help you getting up of that, right? So the actual function of getting over an obstacle or getting over something will require your entire body to work for it and to try to make that as efficient as possible. Because let's take that into a different situation. Let's say that you have 100 gates to go over in order to run away from the dog. So now you don't only have the thing that you need to do it twice or 3 times, but when you are at the 90th gate and you're going to be really fatigued, that's where the entire body will perhaps allow you to go through the other 10, right? Because you still have efficiency there. So, that functional movement of I go into a position where I have the maximum elastic recoil, the maximum energy efficiency compliance from a viscoelastic perspective of my muscle, of my connective tissue, of my joints, etc. I'm preloading all the motor system, the central nervous system, and then I can explode through the opposite movement with power. That's the definition of a functional performance, of a functional skill, of a functional movement. So, what CrossFit did, what functional fitness in terms of competition did, is not staying at the bodybuilding level or at the body condition level, but actually looking at the actual function of these type of skills and this type of movements. And the natural progression of that is obviously training that function. So then you don't only see it on competition, but on the competition floor, but you see it also in the classes, etc. So the actual kipping mechanics, in particular, polished for a training environment like is done in CrossFit. Like, you don't hopefully in a CrossFit gym you don't see much legs all over the place when people are trying to do a pull-up. You do, but not as commonly. And we try to keep people fairly tight through their body. We try to keep them fairly clean within their keeping technique, because we want that energy efficiency. We want to train that efficient pattern of movement. I like to call it efficient rather than correct. That efficient pattern of movement. So you do have that within training, but that is just a functional translation of that pulling movement, or in terms of keeping push-up, of the pushing off the ground movement, right? And in terms of what the members can do, like, you are correctly on saying, in my opinion, that there is a lot of ego, and generally everybody that goes through the CrossFit class experience and the CrossFit training needs to be aware of that, and needs to be aware of the fact that because it's a competitive type of discipline, type of sport, even in its training ground, it will promote, because we're all human, it will tend to promote this type of competition, this type of I want to get as many reps as I can, or I want to get the coolest movement I can get. I want to do what they do. I want to do what the Fitness on Earth documentary did. So I'm going to go through that. But then it is a little bit the role of the coach together with the member to trying to find alternatives that are still appealing, that are still that are successful, that are still appealing, that are still fun. For example, you mentioned that the cases where the person can't. Ash, I think you were talking about somebody that can't do the strict, but then insists on going through kipping during a workout. But they might don't have the strength to load themselves down on their head with control. For example, a coach alternative there, maybe the member is not educated enough to understand that, but a coach alternative could be, okay, you get on the position of the bottom just without dropping down, but just you get into that position. You keep up and then you come off the wall. And you keep on doing that keeping movement without that lowering down position. So the beauty of CrossFit, in my opinion, is also that it's so adaptable, and you can really, change it as much as you want. But obviously, it is also true that members don't always know how to do it, and coaches are very much overwhelmed sometimes by the number of members. So there needs to be a balance there, definitely.
Yeah,
I think when it comes to, like you're saying that, and like members coming in, when they're put into, say, a 3-2-1 go environment, it can be so intimidating. And I do feel that this is where, even though before a workout, the coach should have showed you the progressions through say what you can do, so all the way to the RX option, and this is a big thing I always tell people in class as well, is like, RX is only what the head coach says it is. So RX for that workout is, in our particular case at WIT, will be what Gus deems as RX. Okay, so and same as the weight. The weight is what he wants to get a certain stimulus out of a workout. It's not saying that you need to do that weight. That's just it, because you could get the same stimulus out of, say, the intermediate option. And I really like the fact that you touched on it, because CrossFit is, for me, why I fell in love with the sport itself, say, for the general public, is how adaptable it is. But then as we've touched on this earlier, it's the onus as well on the athlete themselves to check the ego and understand where they are. So when they put themselves through intensity, to know where they're going to drop to. So for instance, if you feel you can do, say, handstand push ups, kipping, and you're relatively okay at them, to maybe start doing the full option and then go drop to the headstand to then explode up, because then this is you managing your fatigue. And as soon as 3-2-1 go happens, the coach can only go around it, because you're as an athlete, you're not going to listen to someone saying you should scale it back. I've done it to many people, and they just look at you, just tell you where to do one. And that's the thing. And you are trying to look out for them, but where the adrenaline is pumping, everything, the music's on, you don't want to be told, no, I think you should step back a little bit and make it a little bit easier at all. So it's
I found quite refreshing and a little bit interesting also just to think about it with all these home workouts and these home based classes, etc. Nobody, or it's very tricky to have, or is unusual, let's say, for these days to be in a class and like the one I did with this morning, and everybody had the same equipment. Obviously, because we all have different things. So nobody is actually doing the same workout, right? Everybody's doing a slightly different workout. And I find that's amazing, because the ego goes completely out of the window, because you don't have anybody else to, compete against. So you are really just doing what you want to do with that workout. And that's been so, I'm like, actually, this is a really different mindset from the one I have normally at the gym. I wonder why, and I should perhaps think more like this when I am in the box. But as I said, I don't know. I don't think it's only me. I think it's a bit of a human nature to find yourself in that position, and perhaps if you are that type of personality, wanting to compare yourself with your friends, or getting yourself out there. But almost thinking we all doing different things is it would be almost healthier in terms of management.
It's part of the benefit to play devil's advocate. The competitive side of workouts means that a lot of people push themselves harder than they would have done without it, and just the feeling of everybody else going for it means people get great results. So there is like a pro and con to that for sure. And one thing I just wanted to go back to, I really liked your point, Franco, about contrasting the kipping movement with the strict for bodybuilding. And I think it touches on a conversation in our previous podcast of why you're doing the exercise in the first place. And the strict version is more inefficient, which means the muscles are overloaded more, so you get more of a strength and potentially hypertrophy stimulus as well, which is why the bodybuilders hate on CrossFit, because you don't get that stimulus when you do kipping. Kipping is more functional in that it uses more muscle groups, uses the whole body to achieve the task of getting your chin over the bar or your chest to the bar or muscle up. And that means for the purpose of achieving it once or for achieving many reps, it's more efficient for that movement standard. And I think that's where we need to be clear, is like, why are you doing the pull-up in the first place? Is it for like a metabolic conditioning effect in a workout to get your heart rate up so you can keep moving? Or is it for developing upper body strength and muscle? And those are basically like the arguments for each style, because if you were making somebody who didn't have many strict pull-ups do strict pull-ups in a workout, they might fail after a few reps because of the local muscular fatigue. And that means their heart rate's never going to get high. They're never going to get that same intense metabolic conditioning effect, which is why this, again, goes back to that scaling discussion, choosing the right option where somebody can get their heart rate up. Equally, if somebody hasn't got any kipping pull-ups and they can do one or two, they're going to be breaking up sets so much that their heart rate doesn't go up either, which is where like jumping or banded or even like ring rows to some extent, they can work more and faster to get the heart rate up by using other parts of their body to assist. And I think it touches on the other thing that you guys said was in the coach's briefing, being aware of what the intended stimulus is for the workout empowers the member to decide on what scaling option they should choose. Because if it is just about working really fast, pumping out loads of reps and achieving a movement standard of chin over bar, you can make a smart decision and choose maybe jumping pull-ups because you're allowed to use your legs and work hard and fast. But if we're doing a strength piece, then doing inverted rows or ring rows with a tempo or something, if you're looking to build muscle, that would be the appropriate scale. And neither's wrong, it's just context specific, and being aware of what the intended outcome for a pull-up is means that the coach and the member can adjust accordingly.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, I didn't want to be so, let's say, absolutistic in what I said before, in the sense that there is obviously a huge carryover from the strict movement to the keeping. Like, you do need that strength, as you were mentioning, to actually being able to hold the keeping over muscle fatigue, hold the keeping over high heart rate, so intensity, etc. So that's a very important, let's say, accessory or part of that keeping mechanics that we need to do. We need to work. But just to give you a bit of perspective, in my rehabilitation programs, so when I give a rehabilitation program to a patient, let's say that I need to get their hip more stable. Okay, let's be really broad there. I need to get their hip more stable through a particular plane of motion. Then a lot of times the technique I actually perhaps even naturally get into using is something a little bit slower. Still, I tend to use anyway a functional environment rather than a hypertrophic one, but I make that functional environment a little bit more biased for that hypertrophy and for that muscular reaction, because there are, in clinical practice, when we are actually dealing with pain and we're dealing with an injury, etc., there are several different reasons for that. There is a physiological vascular reason, there is an actual immunitary reason, there is a muscle strength and stability reason. So there are a lot of different reasons to do that. There are a wide rationale to do that. So I do bias and do start with a bit more of a hypertrophic functional training, but then I always trying to follow that within the same superset usually, or at least within the same session, with a more functional, elastic, connective recoil, connective efficiency type of training. And it's basically almost like if I was doing if I do a parallelism, a strict movement and then a keeping movement. Okay, obviously is hopefully after 8 years of university a bit fancier, but it is that, it is, you take that hypertrophy bias, that circumlemmatic bias, that really controlled movement to develop that basic skills, that basic strength, that basic stability, and then you translate that, you carry on that into that plyometric keeping elastic efficiency movement.
Let's play devil's advocate and why do people criticize kipping?
I think again, another huge discussion here, because I think from a methodological standpoint in CrossFit, obviously we know that CrossFit had over the years acquired, and now is getting better and better over the last few years. But in particular, at the beginning, acquired a little bit of a tricky name and not a great reputation. And the reason for it, in my opinion, is also due to the fact that had this huge boom of people picking it up, opening boxes, perhaps allowing people to open boxes with fewer certifications that they should have needed, perhaps, and these obviously created a community worldwide, which at the beginning didn't have a huge amount of standards, in my opinion. Okay, this might be a little bit tricky, but anyway, that's my perspective historically. Now it is getting better over time, but because of that reputation, a lot of what has been shown over the years by not pro athletes but by the general public taking part in CrossFit is perhaps a lot of pushing themselves to keep in movement without the appropriate stability. And so you see a lot of workouts, even online, when you look at amatorial videos, etc., done through that keeping movement and push themselves to the limit without that appropriate stability and that appropriate technique behind. And obviously that is a risky environment. That is something that is actually, it's from a clinical perspective, is not so risky from an injury, because that's rare. It's more risky for that person to find themselves in an uncomfortable position and to end up straining something because they, as we said before, overreact to it from a movement confidence perspective. Okay, so it is a risky environment for that from that perspective, from that point of view.
It's not the kip itself. It's not the kip itself. It's what the kip can induce. That can be the issue, because it's like as you said on that, and just touching on that is I think because it's such a new sport in general, being 10, 11, 12 years now, probably 12 years old or something, that it's
2012
we've seen the evolution of it, but then as those years where you got those hardcore fanatics at the start, which were just moving from A to B as fast as possible, you then started to get a lot more specialists into the sport. So you got your gymnastics, you got your weightlifters, you got your, specialists in coaches as well. So then they can start to coach gymnastics properly. So, coach the hollow body, coach the arch, rather than just go from A to B. Because when you was discussing earlier and you were saying about bodybuilding and then the more functional movement, I know when I remember being in the gym and stuff, and you see someone doing a weighted pull-up, right? Then when they get towards the end, they do a slight kick anyway from their hip. If they don't do an actual kick that we say, which is probably then better, because it's the gymnastic kicks are total body tension, but they use a little bit of a hip hop to get their chin over the bar, and then. But this is then where I always try and say to my clients or members and stuff like that. So if you have to cheat your way to get from A to B, make sure you give something back going from B to A. So if you kick yourself up, control the negative back down. So then at least you'll get, because that's if we're doing, a strict environment. So if we're doing strict pull-ups and you have to then do a kick just to get yourself up for one more rep, I say, well, then give it back, give the effort back of controlling the negative down, so you're not just doing a rep. Because for me, the rep is just a number. That doesn't matter. We're trying to get you to desired stimulus, but if you're then getting from A to B and you're doing a kick on the 8th rep, and then you haven't got anything from that, you've just moved and potentially put yourself into compromised position. Whereas if you've then kicked yourself up and then you've lowered yourself down, I've still got the goal of that. I've got you to a point of near enough failure, and then I've taken you a little bit beyond, and then you've controlled it down. And that's, you know, and I'm guilty of it, but you're doing, say, doing something like curls, and say do a set of 8. You do 7.5, and that last one you drop, right? And so essentially you've done 7.5 reps. You haven't done 8 reps, because all the other reps you've controlled the negative to a degree. But this is why I've always try and remind people that the last rep still counts, even though I know where you're doing, like put up and you drop down from the bar or whatever. But it's like, in general, always remember, if you've got a target rep range, that it's not half a rep on that last one.
Yeah, I think that echoes what we were saying before about the focus being on performance versus stimulus. So because it's a scored workout, it's about achieving the movement standard by any means to get the rep. Whereas if it's a development session where you're actually trying to become a better athlete, then making it difficult, getting the stimulus is why you're doing it. So in your case, if you're doing like a difficult set, all that really matters is that the muscle feels extreme fatigue, it feels the tension of the weight, and gets the stimulus to come back stronger. It doesn't matter how many reps it takes, that's all that counts. Whereas if you're doing it in a competitive setting, it's the opposite. The stimulus doesn't matter to the muscle. All that matters is that you achieve the movement standard by any means. And that's where the ego point comes in again. If you're doing it to achieve certain numbers, then you're potentially missing out on the benefit of the training in the first place. So knowing when you're competing versus knowing when you're training, and actually thinking, okay, am I doing this workout to get better, or am I doing this workout to win? Because it's a very different intention when you go into the gym.
Yeah, because in a class environment, that's where I think as you say, the ego can really get carried away with a lot of people. And I think the ego is so important, because the ego can really make you push beyond. And I love the ego lifting. I'm 140 ego lifting, but it's just, I think it kind of comes back to a lot of what Franco, and I know we all three think of it like that as well. It's just like, it's understanding when to ego lift or ego cardio, whatever, and when to actually understand, is this going to be better, me moving through my range of motion faster? Am I getting any better? Or is it now just being a sweat? I'm leaving today feeling better because I've sweated a lot and I've moved a lot, but have I actually got any better? And when you're going to the gym and the classes, even if you don't go to a level of competition and you say utilize maybe some of the classes as a competitive environment, it's so important to kind of take your foot off the gas a little bit then. You're trying to get better. And that's, I think, all of us, even if you're competing, you're trying to get better. So to create shortcuts.
The difference there is that who competes, the athletes, they know what's best for them because they are so experienced about it and they're so driven, they looked into it a lot, while the general member needs to rely a little bit on the coach. And unfortunately, that is not always possible, because you almost would need the 10 minutes with every single member before the class to discuss it, right? And you can't do that, is not possible. So it is the member that needs to be educated and needs to actually, if they are serious about taking on the sport of CrossFit rather than the fitness class, the sport of CrossFit, then they need to actually go through that, right?
Then you get to I know, like you've been in my classes and stuff like that, where it's like, it seems that all I'm ever telling people to do is pace. And it's like, no, there is a perfect opportunity to go balls to the wall and end yourself. There is such a need for that. And I know you've been great. I've loved watching you do it yourself, like, in classes, and you compete against other people in the class. And I think that's right. What CrossFit is. CrossFit is that, but there is also the thing of you understand your body and the requirement from that workout, and you know what, I'm just going to end myself and see about how long I can hold on.
And you can have the other, right? You can have the other way around, because, for example, it's quite interesting thinking back, like while you were talking, when I'm a little bit more conservative perhaps than pushy in terms of technical skills. I push myself quite a lot from a cardiovascular, and I mess it up at the beginning of the EMOM going all out, but and you know that. But in terms of movement, for example, my Kipping muscle ups were a gymnastic kip, because I learned how to do the glide kip first. because I didn't have that, I wasn't able to hold that hollow position and to hold that control of the midline. And so that glide was a little bit better in terms of teaching me that. But then I remember, for example, I don't know, 1 year ago or whatever it was, when you were telling me, now you are ready to actually try the gymnastic kip and be more efficient within the workout. And I needed that push to, instead of taking 4 seconds every muscle up, to do them to do 4 in 4 seconds. Is maybe no, but is I needed a little bit that push. So I want to just to mention that there is also the other way around. That there is the occurs the instance where the athlete might be a little bit overly cautious, which is always better than the alternative. But then the coach role there is to actually figure out how to push them a little bit further if they can do that, right? In the sport of CrossFit again, all considering risk and benefit and what is actually you want to do. But then, if you allow me one, I know we're probably towards the end, but one last thing on the. As you asked me, why do I think kipping is considered so bad?
That's like half an hour ago.
I was thinking about that. I wrote it
we get it.
That's why I have. No, but it is interesting. For example, like at university, with some of my students, when they learn that I do CrossFit, when we talk about it, etc., or they might see it on social media, and we chat about it. I had more than once the comment of, the CrossFit pull-ups are so bad for you, or the CrossFit these type of movements are so bad for you. And obviously I'm talking about perhaps people that are not familiar with the sport, so they actually have never done it. They don't know what's behind in terms of performance. But I'm also talking about people that they're gonna end up being clinicians in a year or so. And so you can start understanding a little bit how, if that is the type of reputation and the type of image that the sport has on the surface, then also a lot of physios, a lot of osteopaths, a lot of clinicians will end up being a little bit, I don't want to say negative, but being a little bit scared of the CrossFit performance or the CrossFit sport itself. While, for example, if you go to a physio and say, I'm a triathlete, they're going to be, that's great, that's a great sport. But it's not that I don't see running injuries, or I don't see swimming or cycling injuries, right? It's just a different perception of it.
I think I think it was on the last episode with Franco, and we said the thing with CrossFit though is you put yourself into so many different positions that you are exposed to all these different potential injuries or potential, adaptations that normally, if you run, swim, bike, say, it's very individual, and you're going to have certain injuries that come up all the time. So that's a runner's injury. This is a cyclist injury. And it's just like, whereas in here, CrossFit, you run, you cycle, you do, and then you do gymnastics, and then you do weightlifting for high volume, then you do it for heavy sets. It's like you expose yourself to so much different stress that for the general public, sometimes it can take a bit of a hit, because then they do their thing, then they go and say, have their coffee before they leave the gym to get a bit more energy, sit behind a desk, then start typing all day in a really compromised position, and then get on a train home and sit in front of the TV. But to be fair, CrossFitters are quite good, not everyone, but a lot of CrossFitters are a lot more health conscious. And because it seems to be, once someone starts to see the potential that they can have, they look, cool, how can I get from A to B? I've seen that people in the class doing muscle ups, and I can barely hang on the bar. How can I get there? Cool, I'm going to need to probably lose weight. I'm going to need to improve my gymnastics. I'm going to need to do all these things. And they see it's a journey. So a lot of the time, it kind of goes hand in hand with that out of the gym experience. And this is why CrossFitters are, I think, such a well-rounded
you're right.
individuals.
Yeah. I think you're right, because, for example, if you are a runner or a cyclist and you're really, really into it and you're really pushing yourself, I still see plenty of athletes within running, endurance, or cycling, triathlete, etc., that don't look at 360 degrees as much of a CrossFitter. And in particular, for example, with the mobility. And the reason for it is because, generally speaking, they don't need it. They don't need it as much as a CrossFitter. So it is true, you're right, like the intrinsic nature of the sport is one of the things that makes the enthusiast so health conscious at all different levels or different degrees. So I absolutely agree. Yeah.
I do think there is a circle there, and I think where it's you join, in my eyes, when I look at a member, so they join a CrossFit gym, there's obviously 2 ways, but they see the CrossFit people, they see everyone doing their fancy stuff, they go, oh, I want to get to that. They then get to wherever that is, and they think, do you know what? I'm actually quite happy being not actually at that level. And then they just start focusing a lot more on like the well-being side of things, eating the good quality food, the WIT 30s and stuff like that. When we do those challenges, they're very conscious about their health and well-being. Whereas then you do have the other side of thing where you get to that, and then they lead into the performance side of things. And then you look at some of the athletes now, and Josh is an example. As seeing how much he has progressed from what he was. Admittedly he was a dancer and stuff before, so he's always moved well. But now he's into a thing, and he's gone and competing at sanctionals and stuff like that, and he's doing pretty well for himself. So it does show that a member, when they then become a proper enthusiast and they commit the time to more than just the hour in the gym and all the stuff that goes alongside that, and where that kind of leads to, and then you hopefully don't get all the injuries and stuff because you're priming your body outside the gym as well. So
yeah, I think you're right.
That was really nice. That was a really interesting conversation, I think.
This was a lot more technical. I was expecting it to be quite dense and short. Instead, at the end, we can speak for another couple of weeks probably.
Yeah, thank you, Franco. I think we'll wrap that one up there. We could go on forever, I think, talking about the intricacies of mechanics and risks and rewards in CrossFit, but maybe we'll do a part 3 one day. Thank you very much for your time again, mate.
Thank you for having me, guys. Thank you, guys. Thank you for having me.
No worries. And Rob, anything else to add?
No. I just think the usual stuff that I say. One was again, as I say, thanks, Franco. Every time I get the opportunity to talk to you, I always find it very interesting. Same as Ash. It opens my eyes up to different areas and different thoughts, but also sometimes it solidifies some of the thoughts that I have, and also sometimes just think, it's not actually as bad as I was thinking. So it's really educational. So I just want to thank you for today.
Thank you.
As always, guys, please share this episode if you did enjoy it. Share it with a friend and someone else that might be bashing on CrossFit at the moment, and show them that it's not actually as bad as it might seem. And please do know. And also, if if you're intimidated by CrossFit, please listen to this. And it's open to everyone, because I know I have members that say see CrossFit gyms and they get a little bit intimidated by the big movements and so forth. But it is really suitable for everyone. So thanks a lot for listening, guys. I hope you enjoyed today. As always, share the episode we're on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. So thanks a lot, guys, and catch you guys next week.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Bye.